Welcome to Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation. We're absolutely thrilled to have you with us tonight for the extraordinary gathering of distinguished authors, historians, and influencers to discuss the importance of the Jackson House in our American history. What a turnout. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to spend with us this evening. I especially want to thank our panelists and moderator and our staff at the Henry Ford. I also want to acknowledge the Erb Family Foundation for their support of the Jackson Project. The Erb, thank you, yes. They committed $5 million, first in, lead gift, to ensure the preservation of this significant structure, and it gave us what we needed to get the house to Michigan. The Jackson House was a safe haven. You heard that on the video, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others worked. They collaborated, they strategized, they planned the Selma to Montgomery marches of 1965. The marches served as protests against the systemic racist policies within the South and raised awareness of the struggles Black voters faced. Earlier today, we held a special site dedication in Greenfield Village. Maybe some of you were with us. It was a historic moment for this institution and for all of us as we gathered to dedicate the site on Maple Lane as the new home of the Jackson House, symbolizing the joining of two cities and the merging of the past with the present. And tonight, we gather in this hall of American Innovation with our esteemed group of panelists to discuss not only the significance of the home, but perhaps more importantly, what it symbolizes today. At the Henry Ford, we believe in the power of historical objects. We're surrounded by them. The truth they tell and the ways in which they bridge the past and the present. This house fully represents conflicts we continue to face and civil liberties we continue to fight for. As we move forward in our efforts to relocate and preserve the Jackson House, we are reminded that this is not only about preserving a structure, it's about preserving the legacy of a critical moment in our nation's history, a moment that continues to resonate deeply today. And these are lessons for all of us to learn from. We stand at a pivotal junction right now where we have the opportunity to ensure that the stories of courage, the stories of resilience, and the relentless fight for justice that the Jackson House embodies are not only preserved, but also elevated and shared with a broader audience. By relocating the Jackson House to Greenfield Village, we enable 1.6 million visitors annually and millions more through our digital outreach to engage with this vital piece of history. We can't do this alone. This project is a $30 million endeavor that includes meticulous reconstruction, robust educational programming, preservation, digitization of artifacts, and ongoing stewardship. We need your help to make this vision a reality. Your support will enable the Henry Ford to bring the Jackson House to Greenfield Village, honoring the courage, the determination, and the perseverance of those who changed the course of American history. Together, all of us as a community can come together and we can ensure that the lessons of the past illuminate our path forward to a more just and equitable future. I encourage you to join us in this noble endeavor. Through these efforts, we have an opportunity to inspire the next generation of change makers, of innovators, of doers, of thinkers, of creators throughout our society. I do hope tonight that you all are inspired by the program. If you'd like to support the Jackson House Project, I encourage you to scan the QR code. It's on the back of your program. There are details there that can help you help us preserve this American treasure. Thank you so much for being here. We're delighted, and we look forward to when we open the Jackson House in 2026. Stay with us on the journey. Thank you.
And now, our moderator and special guests for this evening's panel. Our panel tonight will be moderated by CNN contributor and former White House official, Jamal Simmons. Our first panelist is Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. Dr. Dyson is one of the nation's most renowned professors, gifted writers, inspiring preachers, knowledgeable lecturers, and prominent media personalities. Currently, he holds the title of Distinguished University Professor of African American and Diaspora Studies and Distinguished University Professor of Ethics and Society at Vanderbilt University. Known for his thought-provoking insight on race, social justice, and contemporary culture, Dr. Dyson's work on figures such as Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Barack Obama have garnered widespread acclaim and sparked important conversation about race in America. Our next panelist is Jonathan Eig. Jonathan is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and serves as one of the Henry Ford's Jackson House advisors. His biography, King, A Life, has been hailed as the definitive biography of Martin Luther King Jr. and was awarded the New York Historical Society's 2024 Barbara and David Zelaznik Book Prize and the Pulitzer Prize. Please welcome our next panelist, Nelson George. He is an acclaimed author and filmmaker with a deep passion for telling stories of the Black experience in America. Nelson has authored several groundbreaking history of African American music, including Where Did Our Love Go? The Rise and Fall of the Motown Sound, The Death of the Rhythm and Blues, and Hip Hop in America. Finally, allow me to introduce our final panelist, Jawana Jackson. Jawana is the daughter of Dr. Sullivan and Richie Jean Sherrod Jackson, and the previous owner of the historic Jackson House. Dedicated to preserving and sharing the legacy of the house, Jawana collaborates with the Henry Ford to raise its profile and engage new audiences worldwide.
Jawana Jackson. Hello, Detroit. Good to see y'all. Good to see y'all. Good to be home. Welcome to this very important event. I'm very glad to see this huge crowd that's here. Jackson House from Selma to Detroit, and it's an honor for me to be on the stage with these people who are up here. I'm a fan of many of them, so I hope you enjoy them as much as I have today, spending some time together. So as a kid in Detroit, I know a lot of y'all are from here, so as a kid in Detroit, you go on these field trips when you're in school. And so one of the first ones you do is, you go to an apple orchard, right? You pick apples. Everybody knows this, right? You pick these apples. And then by the time you're in high school, you go on these hay rides where you can get under the blanket and snuggle up with your sweetie. So we like that one too. But in between the two of those is the trip to the Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village. And this is the place where you see Thomas Edison's house, and you see the Wright brothers' house, and you see George Washington Carver's house. And now you're going to see the Jackson House. And what's beautiful about this place is you get exposed to history in 3D, right? You get to touch it. You get to see what's happening. You walking in and out of the buildings. People are talking to it. So it's a great way to understand as a young person that these things you read about are real. Real people lived here. Real people did these things. And so often we see these things and we think it's something you read about in a book. But here at Greenfield Village and the Henry Ford Museum, you actually realize it's real. So I want to thank Patricia Meridian. I want to thank Spence Medford and my dear friend Ellen Hills-Rang, and then her team, Jackie and all the folks here, but Jackie and Christy and everybody, Amber, who helped me get here and helped pull this together. So I'm going to turn now to my panel. And we're going to start by setting the scene. I want us to go big first, and then we're going to close in. I want to talk about the importance of Selma. Why is it that Selma holds so much attention for us, and thinking about Bloody Sunday, which is something that everybody who studies African American history and the civil rights movement knows about. What they may not know about, for those of us from Detroit, that Jonathan Eig talks about in his book, 10,000 people who marched with Mayor Jerome Kavanaugh and George Romney, the governor, who's a little different maybe than his son, but and who marched on behalf of civil rights. Talk to us a little bit here about the importance of Selma and why it holds a special place in our history.
Yes, sir. Well, first of all, it's great to be on this panel with such a distinguished Detroiter like Jamal Simmons. Give it up for him again. He's a tremendous young man. And this great panel of all-stars, you got the cream of the crop with the exception of me and Ms. Jackson.
Another Detroiter, by the way, for those who don't know.
And I see that in the program, my picture is Dr. King. So I will be speaking as Dr. King tonight. I'm happy to join with you tonight. Dr. King had humor. I hope y'all got one too. So when you think about Selma, Alabama, right, it could have been any geography. It could have been any southern city. It could have been Albany, not Albany, Albany, Georgia. It could have been Hyssop, Alabama. It could have been in the Delta of Mississippi. But what made Selma, in particular, a remarkable, grieving geography is that there was the collision of the determination of black people to be free and the allies that gathered around them, and the stern, staunch resistance of its appointed sheriffs, elected sheriffs, chiefs, and the like, who were in official spots in Alabama, who were so determined to resist any gesture or overture toward freedom. And so, as you know, way before Dr. King was there, SNCC was there, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and you all know that SNCC and SCLC had a little beef, because everybody wanted to be first, right? You get the bronze, you get the gold, you get the silver. You're the Bloods, you're the Crips, right? It had internecine squabbles. You're the Baptist church, you're the AME church. So there was always a kind of tension about who was getting there first. And Martin Luther King Jr. was seen much the way Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton is today, believe it or not. Why does he come? Why is he bringing the cameras? Why is he bringing all the hullabaloo? But Dr. King brought attention, national attention, to a local situation when he showed up. The work had been done by the young people. Members of his staff had done it. The Dallas, the Dallas County League of Voters had invited them down. And so this was a tremendously tense time. And Selma became the scene of, as you said, Bloody Sunday on March the 7th in '65, when, there was the collision between the willful determination to resist black progress and the insistence that these are American citizens in quest of democracy. So the Bloody Sunday happened. 2 days later, Dr. King's turnaround Tuesday, where because of an injunction, he refused to go forward. And then finally the march after Jimmy Lee Jackson, a veteran, was murdered, and James Reeb, a Unitarian minister, was murdered. And then there was Dr. King's famous, "How long? Not long." But all of that was made important because the ordinary citizens inhabiting that space finally stood up for justice, and it made Selma the scene of an international focus about social transformation and the final delivery of the voting rights for historically maligned and vulnerable black citizens.
And Jonathan, you chose to write about this in your book, King, in your biography that's been hailed and highly recommended. I've been reading it, it's good. As you think about Selma in the course of King's life, what made it significant for him as you focus on it, that personality
Yeah, you know, one of the things that happens with our historic figures, with people like Dr. King, is that we turn them into monuments and national holidays and 1,000 streets, these honors that he richly deserves, and we lose sight of the humanity. Which is one of the reasons that I love visiting this house so much and hearing Jawana's stories, because it returns King to flesh and blood. It reminds us that he was a person. And one of the things that's so important about this house and about Selma in general is that it reminds us that King was failing, that he was struggling. And the story of King's triumphs are woven in with his failures. He fails in Birmingham before he succeeds. He fails in Albany, Georgia. He fails in St. Augustine, Florida. And he comes to Selma, where he's been badly maligned for not marching, for turning around on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And where can he go to recover? Where can he go to find peace, to find comfort, to strategize about what to do next? In the house where we are all going to be able to walk through soon. And that's so important just to remind us, and hearing Jawana's stories and hearing her parents' stories reminds us that King was the guy who borrowed pajamas when he came to the house. He was the person who read bedtime stories to this little 5-year-old girl. And think about how important that was for him. If he'd been staying at a hotel, would he have been able to recover the peace of mind that he needed to finally complete that march and to complete the journey toward a Voting Rights Act? I don't know. I just know that his life was a lot more difficult than we tend to think, and that's why he needed the comfort of these homes. It wasn't just that he needed a place to sleep. He needed a place to rest and to gain strength, and the Jackson House meant that for him.
So that brings us to the woman of the hour. So Jawana, you lived in this house. You were a member of the family that gave Dr. King this respite. Can you just talk to us for a second about what this meant when you saw it? How did you experience it when Dr. King got there? And Jonathan Eig is great because in his book, when he talks about Dr. King being a real person, one of the details that I had never heard before, but I thought was interesting, is that he bit his nails. That he was a real person. He had, strengths and flaws. So I thought that was fun. But you tell me what you saw and how you experienced it.
Let me just, first of all, thank each and every one of you for coming to support this house. I was so very, very young, 4 and 5 years old, when the world literally came into my home. One of the things that I told my husband when at the death of my mother, my last parent, now this house belongs to the world. So many people came into 1416 Lapsley Street because of Martin Luther King Jr., because of my parents. It was always a place where the doors were open for people that yearned for justice and peace and freedom. Sometimes I cannot wrap my arms and my brain around the fact that a structure that was built in 1912 is still opening its doors and welcoming people who yearn for the principles that we hold so dear in this country. The world had a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I had an Uncle Martin. He was someone that read me bedtime stories. He was someone that, even though there were Nobel Peace Prize recipients and the James Baldwins of the world there waiting to talk with him, he was always available for a little 4-year-old girl who asked him one day, "Uncle Martin, why is the sky blue and the ground brown?" The things that I have seen, the stories that I have been able to tell throughout my life have been incredible. But the one, I guess, gift that I can leave is this house here at the Henry Ford. For me, it is the natural progression of my life and the history that I have been so honored to be a part of. What is this going to mean to this community, to the Henry Ford, to the nation, and to the world? That is the conversation that I think we need to have tonight.
I want to stick with you a minute on this because I know that you have some real thoughts about that. And I would love to get, as someone who not just was a little girl when this happened, but who lived with your parents who talked about this and you heard stories about it in your life, tell me what you think that it means to the world.
The house to the world means a safe haven. So many people came in that house from different religions, from different races. You name it, they came to that house. And let me just say, the creation of community and family begins in the home. I was very, very fortunate to have parents, Sullivan and Richie Jean Sherrod Jackson, that opened their doors to the world. We now have a responsibility to open our hearts to each other and to the world. What this house will do is allow generations yet unborn to understand that we are our brother's keepers. Our strength as Americans and our strength as keepers of the world house, our strength is in each other. And to touch one another and feel and know that I am making you as strong as you are making him. So for me, it is, again, the natural progression of a legacy that was left to me, and I had to make the decision of how to share that legacy. And it became increasingly apparent to me that the house did not need to stay in Selma, that it needed to be in a venue where many more people could touch it and understand the principles that not only Uncle Martin shared with me, but that my mother and father instilled in me from birth.
So first of all, if you grow up in Detroit, you know Motown, right? Everybody knows Motown? So I hear this music my entire life, the soundtrack of my parents, Motown, Motown, Motown. At some point, I discover Where Did the Love Go? And Nelson George wrote this book that for me filled out all the details of this incredible experience of Motown and gave me an affection that as a kid who didn't grow up when it was popular, but in the generation afterward, I can really appreciate. So right now, Nelson is working on a documentary about this house, so I feel like it's in good hands, but I want to know, why is it in your hands? What made you decide that this was a project that you wanted to spend your time on?
Well, good evening, Detroit and Dearborn and everyone else. I guess my journey to this story kind of starts somewhat here in Detroit. Back when Prince had the Purple Rain tour, those of you remember, he opened at Cobo Hall multiple nights. So that's my first trip to Detroit, is to come see Prince. But I couldn't come to Detroit and not go to Hitsville. So I went to West Grand Boulevard. I mean, my mother was a mad soul music collector. I got every Motown record with her handwriting all over it just to make sure her friends didn't steal it at the house party. And I went into that building and like, damn, that's a small hallway. This place is, it's a house. This basement where they made this music, it's a basement. And I think that what was stunning and revelatory and inspiring is that extraordinary things happen in ordinary places, right? When I was asked about doing this project, I was like, I knew King had been down there. I knew they'd been marching. It never occurred to me that King had to rest his head somewhere. And where was it? And so the idea that this little house is where Dr. King was when he strategized the marches, that Andrew Young was in that house, and Abernathy, and all the other elements of that movement were in those little bedrooms, that some of the men were sleeping in the bathtub because they had no other place to sleep, that little yellow phone in the corner is where he talked to Lyndon Baines Johnson and negotiated to try and get the Voting Rights Act passed. This little house had an outsized presence in the history of America. And there are many, many places like that around the country. So for me, it's an opportunity to explore, again, this idea of extraordinary things happening in ordinary places. And I think that one of the things that I feel people feel very disempowered these days. It's all happening out there. Oh, social media does this. And the bottom line is almost every great movement, whether it's a cultural music movement, a cultural political movement, or a religious movement, they happen in small rooms by a committed group of people who come together with an idea. Now, they may not have all the same, this wants to do this, wants to do that, just the same way we know the civil rights movement had different factions. Everyone's going this way, though. Everyone wants to go this way. So people, like-minded individuals, can find places to disagree as long as they have the same shared goal. And so for me, the Jackson House epitomizes that idea. And that sort of idea that when I walked around this museum is really rife in all of this inventiveness and all of the innovation. Whether it's the Wright brothers, you see the Wright brothers' house? They built airplanes out of that place. So I think that what we're trying to ultimately do is create a piece that's empowering through the story of Jawana and her family, and the fact that this building sprouts out and has tentacles that right now are part of the national dialogue, that the Voting Rights Act and this next election is one of the things that's on the ballot. Yeah. So you know what I'm saying? So what we're going to try and do with the doc is situate the house in the context of American history and the history that we're literally living through right now. So by the time this exhibit opens, we're either going to be in a battle to maintain the civil rights progress we made, or we're going to be expanding it through our electoral vote. So, you know, so to me, that's what's really, extraordinary about what this process could be. So I feel like we're documenting the house, and we're documenting history in the making.
Now, Jonathan Ike, that brings us to an iconic photo. We saw it in the video that we just watched a few minutes ago of Dr. King sitting in a chair watching Lyndon Baines Johnson on television. Can you walk us through what that photo, the circumstances of that photo, and why it's so important?
Well, let's remember that whenever King started a movement, it was with a goal in mind, and it was not just to rally support. It was not just to try to integrate Birmingham or Selma. It was not just to get the people in Dallas County on the voting rolls. It was with a larger goal in mind. And the larger goal in mind in Birmingham was to get the Civil Rights Act passed. The larger goal in Selma was to get the Voting Rights Act passed. And it's worth remembering also that King had a very complicated relationship with LBJ. When LBJ took office, King was one of the first people he called and said, Dr. King, I'm going to work hard to make John F. Kennedy's promise of Civil Rights Act a fact, to bring it to reality. And beyond that, I'm going to begin working on this great society, and we're going to do wonders for the poor, for black people, for people who've been disenfranchised for centuries, and I need your help. And in many ways, it was the greatest relationship we've ever seen between a president and an activist since Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. But, and there's a big but, Johnson knew and was conspiring with the FBI to surveil Dr. King. Tapping his phones, I'm sorry? In that house. Tapping phones, putting listening devices in hotel rooms, And one of the things I discovered in the research for my book is that it wasn't just the FBI. The FBI was informing LBJ about it every step of the way, and that LBJ personally was suggesting we should leak this to the media because they wanted to keep King in check. They wanted to have power over him. So here's King on the phone from the Jackson house talking to LBJ, working as partners, not mentioning, I listen to these, you can listen to these calls because LBJ recorded his phone calls. Go home tonight and listen to some of these calls. I listen to these calls and you hear King saying, thank you, Mr. President, you know, here's what we're going to do. We've got your back. We're going to support you in every way. And I'm just saying, Dr. King, while you've got him on the phone, why don't you just say, by the way, get the FBI off my damn back? That's what I would do. But King doesn't think that way. Yeah. He's a preacher. He's a man of God. He's not looking for favors. He's not looking for anything. He's trying to do the right thing. He says over and over, his activism is an extension of his ministry. He's doing this because he's trying to save souls. He's not trying to get political points. So this relationship with LBJ is fascinating. And he knows it. He knows he's dealing with a duplicitous partner in this dance. And yet, I think that's partly why he's in tears when he watches on television and LBJ gives one of the greatest speeches of his life and ends it by saying, "We shall overcome." I think King's in tears because he understands the full beauty and tragedy of that moment.
You know, given the activity of the House coming to the Henry Ford, and some people from the Henry Ford traveled down to Florida just a couple of weeks ago to have Jim and I look at some photographs from the House, that one iconic photograph of Dr. King sitting in the living room watching the president that night give that iconic speech. And it suddenly dawned on me just 2 weeks ago, looking at that photo, here we are over 50 years later. At the moment that that photo was taken of Uncle Martin sitting in the living room of my home, America was teetering. We were in trouble with social justice and voting rights. Here we are over 50 years later, and we're teetering once again. Now, let me say this. I am convinced, as an American, that this country has an uncanny ability to right-side itself in its darkest days. It happened in 1965, and it will happen in 2024. If we could mimic this night and have more nights like this throughout this country, think of where we would be as a nation. This House is still bringing people together. It's still bringing community together. It is still strengthening this country.
I heard Andy Young tell a story about Dr. King going to see LBJ after the passage of the Civil Rights Bill. And he says he's talking to him about voting rights, and LBJ says to him, you're probably talking about the right thing, but I just don't have the capital. I can't do it right now, Dr. King. So he walks out, he and Andy Young walk out, and Andy says to Dr. King, well, you know, he can't do it, so we should just go on vacation, and you need some time off. You've been working hard. We gotta, you know, build up our strength. We gotta do that. And I guess King says to him, no, I'm not gonna do that. And he said, well, what are we gonna do? He said, we're gonna go get the president some capital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then ultimately, we lead to Selma. So tell us about voting rights, the significance of it in that moment, where are we in this moment, and how you see this all fitting together.
Yes, well, Ms. Jackson has given the sermonic elegy of the night because we're in the same situation. Different colors, an orange apparition. Has beclouded the American horizon. A lugubrious leech, a foolish fascist, and a dim-witted dictator. But you know what's interesting, right? I mean, part of the problem when we talk about voting rights and when we speak about America, it was a complicated relationship with LBJ. What you said is an echo of the story Harry Belafonte would tell and others about, about FDR with A. Philip Randolph. Like, go out there and make me do it. Make me have no choice but to act in a way that will further civil rights. And the interesting part of that story is it shows ain't nothing given. It's not a given situation. It's not like a television script where it plays out according to a certain logic. These were very fluid and dynamic times. And Martin Luther King Jr., as Jonathan Ive brilliantly portrays in his book, is a man constantly vexed by both the potential of a nation to be great and its refusal to embrace that future in deference to a worship of flesh and skin. And so I would be remiss to not even mention tonight, my cousin Bobby is here, not yet 70, who when he came to work at River Rouge and had to walk to work was beaten by police and menaced by them in Dearborn because the mayor here was a rabid racist who gave Bull Connor a run for his money. And unless we tell the truth about that history, not in a kind of attempt to get stuck there, but to embrace the very future about which Mrs. Jackson has brilliantly discoursed, we got to tell the truth about where we are. This is why we got governors trying to erase history. They don't want to deal with the fact that this is America. This is not America. It is America. In America, the most violent, vicious, vile repudiation of who we are met the greatest potential to become who we are. And isn't it interesting? It's always the black people who were the least likely actors in the great pageantry of American democracy who championed it more than those who ostensibly held tightly to it. And so Martin Luther King Jr. was a greater figure than Lincoln and Jefferson because he was a private citizen without the imprimatur of the state who pushed ahead by virtue of his own belief in God and his belief in the American people to do something great. So yes, he said, I'm gonna get him some capital. He got the man some capital because it's always an interaction between the civil rights streets and the suites of the legislative branch. We need both of them to make something work. So Dr. King gave speeches and gave pressure, and LBJ was able to repeat the words of "We shall overcome." He's quoting the song of the civil rights movement. So I would say that in that sense, voting rights are important because those of us who were denied, my mother is here. My mother is 87 years old from Hyssop, Alabama, living here in Detroit. My mother had to pick cotton. My mother was denied the legitimate right to vote. And here she is now, having seen one black president about to embrace another one. And but because of the greatness of a Joe Biden, I would argue, I think that it is important for that those of us who talk about voting, white brothers and sisters, I want to deputize you. See, because it ain't a situation like this that's great when we all come together. It's when you go into your homes, the very homes, the Jackson home. What would we do if we put your home on display? And what would we see, the kind of beliefs and ideas that are being perpetuated there? I ask you, as deputizing you, you say stuff to your mom and daddy I could never say. No matter how funny I am, how smart I am, how brilliant these men are, you have an access to a thoroughfare of rejuvenation of American ideas that we could never have. Do you have the courage to tell the truth? And Martin Luther King Jr. made certain that people of color, in this case especially black people, could vote because we wanted to make a decision to determine the future of this democracy. And without that lever being pulled, that Chad being dimpled and whatever, we don't have ultimate say-so. Now I end by saying this. Do we face fascism? Without question. Do we face the vile specter of a kind of Nazification of American culture? Without question. But we've already been there because white supremacy is a dry run for fascism. And everything that the nation did to black people is what they threaten now to do to white brothers and sisters. So turn to the very people who have endured that fascism and ask us how we got through all this mess, and we can do that together.
So in terms of doing it together, you met a woman, and you've met several people, I've seen some of the stories, who have come to that house when it was in Selma, and they wanted to hear about the house. They wanted to know about the house, and lots of them were not African Americans. Tell me about some of the people that came to the house and why they wanted to visit it, and why you felt so important to make it available to so many people of so many backgrounds.
Midnight, one night, my father heard a knock at the door. And he went to the door, and there was a man standing there by the name of Wilson Baker. And he was chief of safety for Dallas County, city of Selma. He wore 2 hats. And to look at Chief Baker, you would think he was part of the program there. But when Daddy opened the door, he said, "Dr. Jackson, please excuse me for coming around here so late." He said, "But I wanted to say something to you." He said, I want to say, it's a lot going on in Selma right now. It's hot. I've never seen it like this. He said, "But I just wanted you to know that if I have anything to do with it, if nothing's going to happen to you, your wife, Mrs. Jackson, and what's that little girl y'all have? What's her name?" And Daddy said, "Jawana." He said, her too. He said, "Ain't nothing going to happen to none of y'all if I have anything to do with it." He said, "We're good people here." He said, "And we believe in right." He said, "I believe in right." He said, "And I just wanted you to know that, Doc Jackson." Got on in his car, put his hat on, and left. A lot of people don't know that story about Wilson Baker and my dad and that midnight call. Everybody doesn't hate. And the civil rights movement that came out of my house, the voting rights movement that came out of that house, was a prime example of Dr. King and others bringing people from all walks of life together for one common goal, and that is to strengthen this democracy. That's what we have to do today. We are still in the business of strengthening this democracy. Now, how we do it, we can get in the streets and do it. We can do it at the ballot box. There are many ways to do it. But one of the things that Martin Luther King Jr. said over 60 years ago was, "A people without the right to vote is a society destined to doom." So, we all have a vested interest. Another story, a woman was on the road from Montgomery to Selma. This was before the Selma to Montgomery March took place. And she was a Jewish woman, and she was trying to get back to Selma. And she saw a car with a black man dressed very well that offered her a ride. So she took the ride, only because this black man was dressed very well. And he took her to Selma and took her to my parents' home. She arrives at the home, and the gentleman that picked her up was a man by the name of Dr. Ralph Bunch, who was also staying at the home of my parents and myself with Dr. King. So we had 2 Nobel Peace Prize recipients in that house. So when Dr. Bunch brings her to the house, they realize you've got Martin Luther King Jr. in this house, you've got Dr. Ralph Bunch in this house, you've got Andrew Young, and a Jewish woman. How's this gonna work out? So a meeting was held in the middle bedroom of all of the principals, minus Claire. They didn't include Claire, to try to figure out, what do we do? So the decision was made that she was gonna have to go to a safe house somewhere else. And she was taken to a safe house. But those are, some of the stories and some of the actions that have happened in that house. And, looking back on it, it's another way in which our country gets stronger, when we're pulled and then somehow the fabric gets frayed, but it gets stronger. And I believe that's what's happening today.
And so you've chosen to move this house to Greenfield Village in Detroit. And Nelson, you've chosen to chronicle it.
Well, I mean, what she just nailed, as she always does, quite honestly, Jawana always nails it, is there's these 2 narratives about how we deal with activism, right? I don't know if I stole this from Jesse Jackson or who else, but there's tree shakers and there's jelly makers.
That's Jesse.
That's Jesse, okay.
That's Jesse.
I love this. So the tree shaker gets all the attention. We focus so much on the person who's making that noise. But nothing happens unless someone picks that fruit up off the ground, prepares it, and makes it sweet. And what Jawana and her family represent is the jelly makers of America. And ultimately, to preserve the democracy we have, we're all going to have to be jelly makers. That's why this story is important.
And just to nail you a little bit on this part, how do you plan to get this, to do this project? It seems in some ways like a big project. In some ways, it's, you're focusing in on a very discrete aspect of it. What's your approach here?
Well, there's 2 things. This is a project that's not going to be finished for 2 years. And we've always been on it about a year. So patience.
Yeah.
And following the process. Number 2 is, this is going to be a weird doc because it's some combination of HGTV meets PBS. We have been following the process of the house. We went and met Jawana the day before they were beginning work. We interviewed her right next to the chair that's in the shot with Dr. King. The next day, they began deconstructing the house. And I'm sure people in here know about how to build and take house, but you've never seen a house taken apart, cut in half, put in a truck, and rolled up from Alabama to Michigan. So we've been documenting this incredible process, and so it's an incredible process to see what they've done and they're continuing to do. We were there this morning at the dedication. They got a long way to go to put those 2 houses back together again, along with all of the artifacts that were collected. So that's it's really, a lot of it's going to be the process of how this is done. And that's sort of the what they call verite footage.
Yeah.
Right? And then there's the historical footage. We talked to this gentleman and that gentleman today about the context of this house. And also we interviewed Andrew Young. I'll say one thing interesting that Jawana kind of talks about but doesn't get drilled down to is why the house had to be moved and the lack of support she got in the state. We interviewed the mayor, we interviewed some other folks down there, and it was very clear that there were forces in that community that didn't want that house to continue on as a symbol of certain ideas, right? Because she's had this, how long has it been with the museum?
Since 2014.
So 10 years. And the lack of support, the lack of institutional support within the state of Alabama and the city was pretty consistent to the point where you're like, oh, okay, she ain't really wanted here on some level. It would never be something anyone would say, but that was the vibe we've gotten about the house. So that's the context in which her call here happened. It's not like, oh, I just thought, let's take it up to Michigan. There was an historical context in which she was working where she knew that if she wanted to keep this house alive, it had to be institutionalized with some group that would honor what it is and then protect it. So the doc is going to be about all of these different elements. So it's going to be, construction job meets political activism.
Sounds good. All right, we have time for 2 questions. We have time for 2 questions from the audience. Do I have any hands? Is there one? All right, right up here in the front, I see a woman here in a dashiki. Where you at? Where's my microphone? There you are, over here. To your right, ma'am.
Hi, I am so happy to be here and to know about this historic event. What I'd like to know is, how can I volunteer? What can I do? I don't have a lot of money, but I got a little something, something. But I have a big mouth, I can help, I can write, I can do whatever you want.
All right. There's a young lady right here in a white dress. Her name is Ellen Hills Arang, and she is the one you will see to give your time and your cash. And if anybody else wants to do that, we can do church in here. We start passing. See what we can do. All right. Who else? Right here. Yes, ma'am. In the yellow. Mm-hmm.
Hey, y'all. Good afternoon, everyone. So my question, and I hope I'm allowed to ask this question, but Ms.
This is still America. We're free for now.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Jawan. Okay, so Ms. Jawana, I really do appreciate all of the MLK and Johnson talk, but I want to know who your mama and daddy are. And so can you share some insight or give us a snippet of what that could potentially look like in 2026?
Thank you so much because, we've talked about Uncle Martin. But the ground was laid in 1866 in my family for Martin Luther King Jr. to walk into that house. No one is asked, why that house? Why that family? That's a story, too. I can tell you the story of my grandmother, who was born in 1905, who used to ask her grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, why he carried a copy of the Constitution in his pocket every day. Now, this is a story my grandmother told me. And he simply told her, Juanita, one day, this document is going to ring as true for you and me as every other American. They married in 1866 in Sumter County, Alabama. From that point on, pillars of a foundation were being built for Martin Luther King Jr. to one day walk into that man's great-great-grandchild's house and plan a movement for voting rights in this country. So, when I think about this house coming here, I think about my ancestors that had a commitment to this country. And one of the things that Dr. Dyson said was, isn't it ironic that the people that have been so maligned throughout the history of this country are the ones that are trying to keep the peace? So I'm hoping that the stories in this house of my family, and please understand me, the Henry Ford is getting a home that does contain a huge piece of history. of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but it also contains a rare art collection. My grandmother became an artist at the age of 70. My father, before he went to medical and dental school at Meharry, was a musician who played on the Chitlin circuit. There is music that you're going to see in this house. There are instruments that you're going to see in this house. My mother was an educator. You know, there are pieces of that component of society that you're going to see. So when you walk in the Jackson House and come out of the Jackson House, you're going to see every piece of fabric of American society in one house, along with social justice, which is a huge component as well. So thank you, for asking that question. And I must add this one. Someone on the panel tonight talked about the tapes, the FBI tapes. In 1977, just before I went to Fisk University, which I am a proud product of, FBI comes to my parents' home, opens up a dossier, knows already that I have been accepted to Fisk University, knows exactly everything of my father's business, knows everything of my mother's work with the Selma City School. I knew our lives completely. So, our country has had a lot to account for, but its people are the ones that make it right. And I am convinced that all of the slings and all of the errors and all of the name calling and all of the problems that we're seeing today, the people of America, we're going to rise up and make it right.
There's a story that Jawana has I'd love her to tell about the FBI man in the kitchen.
My mother comes in the kitchen, and background. There were so many people in the house. My parents never knew who was in their house at any given time. So my mother goes in the kitchen one morning, and she opens the cabinet, the bottom cabinet, and a white arm comes out from under the cabinet. Well, the mother's instinct goes up. She immediately goes to find me to take me to safe haven. So she puts me in the clothes basket, which was the plan. Put Jawana in anybody that's near Jawana, if danger comes, put Jawana in the clothes basket and put her over the back fence, and a hearse would come and pick me up and take me to safety. Well, that is done. And then she comes back in the kitchen, and the white arm has unfolded himself, and he's now standing straight up in her kitchen. And he introduces himself to her. He said, "My name is John Doerr, Mrs. Jackson." And my mother's standing there, and she said, "And why were you up under my cabinet? And I need to know this immediately." And he looks at her and he said, "Mrs. Jackson," he said, "I have been up under your cabinet. I've been under this house. I've been on top of this house. I have been surveilling this house for weeks from the State Department." Washington was very much a part of this movement. And my mother said, "From the State Department?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "There is a move afoot from Washington." He said, "Nothing is going to happen to this movement." My parents stayed in touch with John Doerr until his death. And it's just so many stories like that, again, that say how many people came together, again, to make this country a better place. Another story I must share with you is Jim and I were privileged to be invited to the 50th of the Selma to Montgomery March.
And Jim is your husband,
Jim Richie is my better half.
who's a Morehouse man, right?
Who's a Morehouse man.
But to be sure that we got that. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. That was.
And been by my side through this whole journey. You know, it's just, it's amazing how things happen. We're at a dinner in 2015, and the Johnson sisters approach me. And they wanted to know if I was the daughter of Dr. and Mrs. Sullivan Jackson, and I said yes. And I said, I think I know who you all are. And the shorter one, Lucy, said, we want to thank you. And I looked, and they said, we want to thank you on behalf of Daddy for allowing Martin Luther King Jr. and Daddy to work on what we consider to be the most important piece of legislation in the history of America, the Voting Rights Act. If it had not been for your parents allowing Dr. King to have a safe haven, it is quite possible we would not have a Voting Rights Act in this country. So we want to thank you on behalf of our family, on behalf of this country. Jim was standing there with me. I didn't know what to say. But I remember saying to them, I cannot accept those thanks because I did not do that. And they said, oh, no, 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 no. You were there, even though you were 4 and 5. You were there. You were a part of this continuing experiment to make our country better. That's what it's all about, folks. In the end, that's what it's all about. And hopefully this house coming to the Henry Ford, coming to Greenfield Village, will help the next generation do just that. Make this country, make our nation, make our communities a better place for all of us.
We're gonna do this real fast. So right here in the back, and then we're gonna come up to the front.
Yes, I want to make the Selma to Detroit connection and wonder if Viola Liuzzo, who was a Detroiter who went down to Selma and lost her life, and there's even been talk that her death pushed Johnson to eventually sign the Voting Rights Act. But I wondered if she ever visited the house, or if your family knew of her. And I would encourage Detroiters to learn more about her, and hopefully the Henry Ford or Greenfield Village can do something with her legacy.
And
in the
follow
civil
her
rights
example.
movement.
Absolutely.
It's a very good point.
She did not visit the house, by the way. And you must remember that there were so many people connected with the movement, connected with Martin Luther King Jr. You all would be surprised who did not come to that house. You may assume that certain people did come, but certain people came, certain people did not. But Ms. Liuzzo did not. But they played critical parts in the role of the Voting Rights Act. Now, to that I will always say, there were several things that precipitated President Johnson to sign the Voting Rights Act. But I will say this, and I've said it on tour groups that I had in the House. Please understand, Martin Luther King Jr. and Lyndon Baines Johnson were two men from opposite sides of life. They had different experiences. They were different makeup in terms of men. But hear me, both Martin Luther King Jr. and Lyndon Baines Johnson wanted the best for America. If we had leaders today that could put the political aside and think about America and its people, think of where we would be. So our charge is to make sure that we always have in offices, up ballot, down ballot, people that are committed to America and its people.
It's an important story. I know we're hitting time. It's an important story. Does somebody want to just fill the audience in on Viola Luisa?
Well, Viola Luisa, as you pointed out, was from Detroit.
Yeah.
Her husband was an auto worker, and the family, she had 4 kids, I think, desperately did not want her coming down here, and she felt like she had a responsibility, like so many people of all religious and racial backgrounds who came to Selma to join this march, especially after Bloody Sunday. And speaking of people getting involved, I just want to tell really briefly the story of someone who didn't get involved. When I went to Selma to do research for this book, I interviewed Philip Henry Pitts, Jr., whose father was the lawyer for the city and who was fighting to keep the marchers from marching. And his young son was just graduated from law school, worked for his daddy, and actually interrogated King in court and tried to keep King from marching. On Bloody Sunday, he was with a police officer watching from the other side of the bridge, watching the beatings occur. And as I interviewed him in his home in Selma, I said, "Can you show me where you were watching from?" So we got in his car, and we drove across the bridge to the spot behind a little grocery store where he was parked with the police department watching these men being beaten, watching women and children falling, watching John Lewis's head being bashed, watching the scene that horrified the nation. And he sat there, and this is the power of place. This is the power of visiting places, because he said he had never been back to that exact spot. And he sat in that car, he said, "I watched this, and I did nothing. And I said nothing." And this 80-year-old man began to cry, because we have a choice whether we act or whether we don't act. And he did not act. Viola Luisa acted.
It's our last question, and we are going to wrap up. Somebody's microphone.
2 things really resonated with me this evening, and the first one was the idea that the home was not wanted in Selma, but the Henry Ford Museum took a chance and brought it here. And I would like to have someone from Henry Ford really talk about what made Henry Ford decide to take the home.
And then we're going to let Spence get in and answer the question after you, Jawana.
Vivian, thank you for that great question. I'm Spence Medford with the Henry Ford, part of the executive leadership team. When we think about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, that is what happened in that house. We have over 82 historic structures here in Greenfield Village. This house and the stories that happened, your family stories, those stories can be shared with millions of people, the innovators, the future leaders, the problem solvers, the people that are going to bring this country together. They can be inspired by the stories in that house. That's why we brought this house. And that's why we're going to open its doors. But we need everyone in this room to be part of this movement. We cannot do it alone. It's going to take $30 million to get there. But we know this community, this is not just this community's effort. This is a national effort. This is a national effort, and it starts right here tonight. So thank you, Vivian, and thank you to our panel, and thank you, Jawana, Jackson, and Jim, for making this happen. Thank you.
I want to.
All right, Jawana, can you close us out? We'll let you finish here. You can close us out.
I do want to give a response to the young lady that spoke. You made the statement that the Henry Ford Board does not represent someone that has visited the Jackson home. Interestingly enough, once the whole project came before the board, do you know a member of the Henry Ford Board had been to the Jackson Museum? That spoke volumes. And I am honored, I am blessed. The ancestors are honored that this house will now reside here. A lot of people said, you can't move it. History is portable. As it should be, because now we have an opportunity. Millions of people will see and feel this wonderful home. And I want to thank each and every one of you again. I want to thank the illustrious panelists that have joined me here tonight, that I know they're going to keep this story going and also are going to help strengthen the fabric of this nation. That's what they do. So I want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for continuing to make us better. Thank you. Thank you again.
Amen. And thank all of you for coming. Thank you. Good night.